Now I'd like to look at one more example of extension methods, and I'd like to do something that's a little bit more real world than what I've done so far. So what I want to do is I want to create a method on an integer, so I can type something like this, and I could say 5 is between, and then 1 and 10, something like that. So what I want to do is create this is between method as an extension method on the integer type. And in the real world, the way you might do this is first thing you do is you'll create an object, and I'll call this int extensions. Extensions. And then inside this object, you'll create the extensions just like before. So use the extension keyword. And now I say I want to operate on an int. Now I just need to create that is between function. And everything inside of here, everything inside this function is going to be normal Scala code. It's just that we're creating an extension method. So all I have to do is create these two values here. So the minimum value here and then the maximum value here for that range. So we might call this minimum value, or I'm going to call it minimum value inclusive because it includes that value. And then similarly, this will be maximum value inclusive. That's also an int. And then you'll notice that this code returns a Boolean because it's performing this test is 5 between 1 and 10. So this is going to return a Boolean. Now all I have to do is say, well, is I greater than or equal to that min value? And is I less than or equal to the max value inclusive? So that's the test condition right there. If you're not familiar with this syntax, what you could say is if I meets these two conditions, then true, else false. So that's the longer form of that syntax right there. But programmers will take those off because this is a Boolean condition right there. That's really all you have to do to write for that function. And now this is a little more real world because what you have to do to use this line of code right here is you're going to have to import those extensions. So here you would do import int extensions dot star like that. So this code right here is just like this other code here is in some other file. So it's like you can't even see that, so you have to import that here. I just happen to be putting it in the same file right there. And again, I forgot the S right there. But now that looks good. If I haven't made any mistakes, then I can save that. And I have this running down here. And we get true. And now all that's required is that you would come in here and keep testing. And we would say, well, is 0 in between that range and outlying conditions? Is 1 there? Is 10 between there? And then is 11 there? And save all that. And this would be better if I was using some sort of test framework right here, but is 5 between 1 and 10? Yes, it is. Is 0 between 1 and 10? No, that's false. 1, 10, and 11. So if you really wanted to complete this without using a testing framework, you could say, well, I expect that one to be true. And now when I save this, all of these should be true down here. So without using a testing framework, that's a little bit easier to read. But again, the point is just to show how to create extension methods. And I actually used this code in an Android application I wrote a long time ago, but I didn't have a way to write it as an extension method like this using Java and Kotlin back in the day. But with Scala, you can see it's actually really simple to write an extension method on an integer type and then use it just like I do right there. So that was the first thing I wanted to show you. And then I do have this open for a reason. And in this article, which comes from the second edition of the Scala cookbook, as I note right there, I show how to write your own string interpolator. And in Scala 3, what I show is I want to write, you know how they have interpolators in Scala? So normally you have an interpolator like the string interpolator. So if you have a val I equals 10, let's say, then you could do a print line. And this is the string interpolator, the normal string interpolator right there. So you put that right before the string, and then you can say I equals $I. And that's what this S does for you. That is a string interpolator. And there's other interpolators. One is F for handling floating point numbers. There's another one built in named raw that is mostly intended for handling things like new line characters and things like that. When you work with databases, a lot of times you'll use a SQL interpolator that comes with the database library. So what I show over here is I want to create my own caps interpolator. So I want to pass it a string like this where everything is lowercase. And then what this caps interpolator does is it converts that so each letter in each word becomes capitalized, like you see there, there, and there. And in the second example, I show that I'm using the variable b, so I want my caps interpolator to also be able to work with a $B variable inside the string, and it does just like that. So I'm not going to get into all this code in this video. I just want to introduce this topic to you. You can come and read all about it at this article here. The important thing from a Scala perspective is I had to learn that there's something called a string context type, and then you create an extension method on the string context to get started. And I knew that I wanted to create an extension method named caps, and it was going to return a string in the end. And this shows that when I started, the very first thing I learned was I needed a string context. And after that, I got to this point, and then everything after this was research. It's like, okay, what do I do here? And what do I do here for the function body? So that's what I talk about in the rest of this article. And then I show the solution for that here. So if you want to pause the video, you can look at this code right now or come to this URL and read this article. So this is another real world example of an extension method. And if I scroll down here, this example is another string interpolator that I wrote. And this one is called Q. So if you ever used a language, I think this comes from the programming language Ruby. And they had a Q interpolator. I don't remember what Q stood for, but you would put a Q in front of a multi-line string like this. And that interpolator, the one that I wrote, converts this multi-line string into a resulting list like this. So if you come to this article, you see what I'm doing there. This is definitely a real world use of how to create a string interpolator. And I created a GitHub project that demonstrates this. So just click on that link and that'll take you to the GitHub project. And I believe that also takes you to our URL where I explain the code more. And actually, to help you out just a little bit with this, let me open that GitHub project. I just realized this was a project that contains all of the Scala Cookbook 2 examples here. So what you do is you go to this GitHub URL shown up here, and then just search for interpolator here. And here, the one you want is this Q interpolator. And now you can see the source code here for that interpolator. And as I look through this, one other thing I need to note is that this first version right here was written for Scala 2. So that's why some of the code, I was looking at the code and I was like, what's going on here? And then I was like, oh yeah, that's Scala 2. And this is for Scala 2 here where I use an implicit class. And then if you scroll down here, then you'll find the Scala 3 code. So this is the Scala 3 approach. I just put this inside of a package just to differentiate it from that other code above. And then here's the code that should start to look familiar. So we have an extension method on the string. Oops, sorry that I jumped around a little bit, but we have an extension method here on the string context type. Then I create this method or function named Q. And then this area here shows the arguments that I'm taking in. This shows that I'm returning a sequence of strings. And everything actually inside of here is Scala code. So it's I won't say it's simple Scala code, but it's straightforward Scala code. So the only thing you really need to know about extension methods is really this type of syntax right here. And then everything you do inside of your functions is normal Scala code once you understand that you need to work with something like a string context and learn how to work with it. And then down here, I show how to work with Q, so you see that example that I showed before, and this is what I expected. So again, I just wanted to show this code in case you want to dig into extension methods a little bit more on your own.